The year was 1620. A ship called the Mayflower creaked and groaned as it fought against the wild Atlantic waves. On board were 102 passengers, men, women, and children, seeking a new home where they could practice their faith freely. The journey had been brutal. Many had fallen sick, and some had even perished. But after months at sea, land finally came into view. On November 11th, they dropped anchor near the coast of what would later be called Plymouth in present-day Massachusetts. Stepping onto the cold, barren shore, the settlers known as the Pilgrims saw nothing but vast wilderness. Towering trees stood like sentinels, and the cold wind carried the scent of pine and salt. They knew survival would not be easy. The first task was to find shelter. The Pilgrims built small wooden huts, using whatever resources they could gather. But winter had already arrived, and the harsh New England cold seeped into their bones. Food was scarce. They had brought supplies from England, but they wouldn't last long. The settlers scavenged whatever they could, nuts, berries, and whatever small animals they could trap. The land was not uninhabited. The Wampanoag people had lived here for centuries. They watched from the shadows, wary of the newcomers. They had seen European settlers before. Some had brought disease and war. Would these newcomers be any different? December brought brutal winds and snowstorms. Illness spread through the colony like wildfire. One by one, the Pilgrims fell sick. Fever, chills, and starvation claimed more than half of them. At night, the survivors huddled together, praying for warmth, for food, for hope. Graves began to dot the frozen earth. Among the struggling settlers was William Bradford, a man of strong faith and leadership. Every morning, he walked among the sick, offering words of encouragement, but even he knew that without help, they would all perish. Then, one day, as the ice began to thaw, a man walked into their camp. He was tall, with long black hair and a calm, commanding presence. He spoke a single word in English: welcome. His name was Samoset, a member of the Abenaki tribe. He had learned some English from fishermen along the coast. The Pilgrims were astonished. Through him, they met another native named Tisquantum, better known as Squanto. Squanto's story was tragic. Years before, he had been kidnapped by English explorers and taken to Europe as a slave. He eventually escaped and returned to his homeland, only to find his entire tribe wiped out by disease. Now, he stood before the Pilgrims, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Squanto showed them how to plant corn, where to fish, and how to use the land to their advantage. The Wampanoag leader, Massasoit, also formed an alliance with the Pilgrims, agreeing to help them in times of need. Hope, once lost in the harsh winter, was slowly returning. By autumn, the colony had transformed. Fields of corn, beans, and squash flourished. The settlers had built stronger homes and stored enough food for the coming winter. They had survived, but not alone. To celebrate their harvest and give thanks, the Pilgrims decided to hold a feast. They invited the Wampanoag people, who had been their lifeline in the darkest months. The feast lasted for 3 days. The tables were filled with roasted deer, wild turkey, fish, corn, and pumpkin. Laughter and conversation filled the air. Pilgrims and Wampanoag warriors sat side by side, sharing food, stories, and gratitude. William Bradford stood up to speak. "We give thanks," he said, "for the land, for the harvest, and for the friends who have stood by us." Though neither side knew what the future held, at that moment they were not strangers or enemies. They were simply people, celebrating survival, unity, and hope. And so, the tradition of Thanksgiving was born, a moment of peace in a history yet to unfold.